Hello everybody, it's me, Green Beauty ASMR, and today we are back with another ASMR Psych Chat video. Today we're going to be talking about conflict management in adulthood, and I'm going to mention a little bit about some elements that influence the cause of conflict, or some elements that come into play when somebody has maybe a little bit more of a dysfunctional conflict management style. So we'll cover quite a bit, but it shouldn't be too long like my other video, my anxiety one. I am sitting in the spare bedroom, which is a disaster zone, so there is bedding behind me. Please forgive me, but I wanted to get this video out for you. So I have lots of notes, so when you see me turning, it's because I have my slides. Okay, so really the first main causes of conflict have to do with faulty communication. So this really means that communication is not being expressed in an appropriate way. So criticism is given inappropriately, and sometimes we're feeling like our feelings are really hurt if we're not being told something that we really need to hear, if we're receiving undue criticism or excessive criticism. So this is really where conflict comes from a lot of times, is from this faulty communication. In addition to that, this conflict can arise due to real or perceived differences in each other's needs. So what I'm talking about today is applicable among group settings. So if you work on a team, if you're a student and you have a cohort, if you're working on a project, if you're in a group together, but this also applies to one-on-one direct communication. So between you and your partner, you and your boss, or you and a coworker where you just can't seem to get along with this coworker. So there's a couple of things. So if we're talking about conflict management in a group setting, there is something called attribution errors, okay? Something called attribution errors come up in group setting. And this is where people in the group make errors in determining the causes of behavior in other group members, okay? So this can occur, for example, when one group member doesn't complete their work on time, and then we jump to the conclusion that the reason for this was nothing more than irresponsibility. So you see, we jump to conclusions, we attribute things to the other group member without any actual information. So that's with the group setting. Now, the other things I'm going to talk about are applicable to the group and between on one-on-one. So we have mistrust. Mistrust is a very big element of conflict management or conflicts in general. Mistrust is also a very big element in faulty communication. And we also have this idea of grudges. So sometimes we hold grudges against the people we're communicating with or working with, even without it maybe being conscious. And so these grudges are when we feel like we've been treated unfairly. So for example, let's say you and your boss just cannot see eye to eye, and you are constantly struggling with how to communicate your needs, and you feel like their conflict management style is not matching with yours, and then you remember in the past how the boss did this or that, and you have this little grudge that you hold. That will continue to show itself in our ongoing conflicts. And then certainly we have something just as simple as a personality clash that can happen. And this happens between individuals, this happens in a group, and it just may be that our personality styles work differently than the next, or our personality style doesn't necessarily fit or mesh well with other people. So then there can be something like real or perceived differences in our values, perceptions, beliefs, attitudes, and culture. So this is between all of us, right? We can have these real or perceived differences. And if we really harbor on those differences, we're going to notice that our communication is going to be a little bit more tough. We're going to have a harder time. And our conflict management styles may not evolve over time in a way that's healthy and sustainable. So the way I'm going to talk about 5 different conflict styles, and these 5 conflict management styles are based on 2 dimensions: concern for the self and concern for others. Now, what I am referencing is the Rahim Organizational Conflict Inventory. Okay, so these are not my own ideas. I will link all the sources below as needed. So when I talk about these 5 styles, I invite you to think about your own, of course, and think about anybody in your life that you think might align with one of these styles. And then I also invite you to think about the 2 dimensions. The 2 dimensions, is this style about a concern for self, or is this style about concern for others? Now, with that being said, I do not want you to go and label every single person you know, or go and label your partner, or label yourself and believe that this is the only way that you can communicate in conflict, because that's not true. This is a very general idea, as is many things, right? When we're talking about mental health or anything like that, everything is very general. No one size fits all. So this is just good for food for thought and for some self-reflection if you're feeling like this is an area you might have some room for growth. Okay, so the first style is called the integrating style. This integrating style focuses on collaboration and demonstrates a high concern for self and others. Integrating style. The obliging style focuses on areas where both parties agree and on overlooking differences by demonstrating a low concern for self and a high concern for others. So in the obliging style, they put their needs on the back burner for the concern of others. Now, this might seem, that might be okay, but we know that perhaps that's not the best way. The third type of conflict management style is the dominating style. Now, I can guarantee that many of us know people like this, especially in our place of work, maybe. The dominating style. It is when one party attempts to force their own viewpoint at the expense of the other party. We also might know some family members like this. And the dominating style is characterized by high concern for self and low concern for others. So that dominating style, they stand out. We know who they are at work. We know who they are in our family. They might be our partner, and we keep realizing over and over again that the way that they handle conflict and communication is just not working for you. And so you might be thinking of breaking up or wishing things were different. So these type of people with this type of style, they really stand out. And oftentimes they really struggle with getting people on their side. They struggle to elicit empathy and understanding from others because they are so overbearing and dominant, and it becomes quite obvious that their concern is not for others but only for themselves. The fourth conflict management style is called the avoiding style. We also might know a lot of people like this. The avoiding style occurs when one party attempts to withdraw from the conflict. Now, this means that they are demonstrating a low concern for self and a low concern for others. So the avoiding style is when conflict comes up, you freak out, oh my gosh, this is uncomfortable, and you pull back. You avoid, you withdraw, and you just try to move on as if the conflict is not occurring. We might see this more common among women in the Western cultures for a lot of different reasons. We also might see this maybe in some of our parents, and we might have adopted some of this behavior as well. And so when we're in a conflict or in a moment that requires real, stern, honest, and vulnerable communication, we might find that we avoid and withdraw. And the fifth style of conflict management is called the compromising style. Now, this is a give and take strategy, so it's showing moderate concern for self and moderate concern for others. So, like I said before, we don't want to pass judgment on any of these styles, though it's quite obvious after listing them which one is most adaptable or which one is most suitable to facilitate healthy conflict resolution, and that is the integrating style, the first style that I mentioned. And remember that this one focuses on collaboration, and it demonstrates a high concern for your needs, but also a high concern for others. So you're really working together to integrate a solution that really satisfies both parties or both groups, etc. So oftentimes when we have successful leaders or successful bosses who are well liked, or people in your organization or in your personal life, these are people who usually tend toward a more integrating style of conflict, thus allowing much more give and take between them and the other people, which makes everybody feel safe and heard and accepted. So the integrating style is the most flexible and is the most sustainable in terms of being successful with the way that you handle conflict and communication. Now, looking back at the dominating style, this one can be quite a challenge if we are functioning in close proximity to people like this. It can be really difficult. Now, can you imagine a scenario where one person is the dominating style and the other person is the avoiding style? Sometimes we find these two people in an intimate relationship together, like a romantic relationship, and they function because one avoids and withdraws, and the other dominates, demands, says you did this, you did that, and you as the other person cannot even be in that space of conflict, so you pull back and the relationship keeps on going. So when I talk about these things, it's really just to provide psychoeducation, so educating you on psychological concepts, but it's not to presume that this is the only way or I know the way. This is just information that I want to share with you, and then you can choose to do whatever you'd like with this information. So going forward, I want to emphasize that when conflict arises, whether in a group setting, in your relationship, at work, etc., it does not mean that things have to end. So many of us have a hard time with conflict. Just because conflict arises doesn't mean that whatever relationship is there, or whether it's a colleague, etc., has to rupture, because it doesn't. It is natural and a part of interpersonal interactions for conflict to arise multiple times. So the key is how it is handled. And when conflict is handled well by all parties involved, we experience growth, both interpersonally and within that relationship as well. So it's a growth experience. It's very difficult to be in the heart of conflict and vulnerable communication, but when we go deep into it and we sit in it, we then move forward from it with many more assets than we did going into it. So it's really important to know also that in conflict, we never want to perceive it as someone is the winner and someone is the loser. That type of black and white thinking is problematic and really won't serve to create a collaborative outcome. So when you're faced with that, I invite you to expand on the way that you're perceiving, even if you feel like, you know what? No, this person really did wrong. They did this very obvious, tangible thing that was wrong, and I feel this type of way about it. So it feels very black and white. However, if we can make a little bit of room in that sensation, in that experience, and shift a little bit out of the black and white thinking, we will find that much more growth can happen from this experience, no matter how much we might dislike that other person. So, when in a relationship, when I'm talking about when growth occurs, it also means a sense of cohesiveness between the individual parties increases. So if you're working on a team at work and you have a conflict and you all work through it, you process through it and move on, you're going to feel a stronger sense of cohesiveness moving forward. And if we're talking about romantic relationships, you're going to feel, you'll describe something like, well, I feel even closer to you after we got into that fight. That's so common, right? We often feel that way. We say, oh, I feel even closer. And that has to do with the cohesiveness. You're building the intimacy and trust between you and your partner. So, here are some resolution methods, conflict resolution methods. Many of these you may have heard. We are taught some of these in elementary school, like the I message, which I'll talk about. But I want to just throw them out there and remind you, and you can take them with you or not from this little video. So the first conflict resolution method is to deal with conflict as it arises. Now, this is particularly difficult in romantic relationships for some of us. We kind of might bottle things up, or, we just get annoyed. Oh my gosh, that was so annoying when they did that. You just sort of put it on the back burner. Maybe you have kids to deal with. You've got to go to work. Your schedules are busy. You've got family in town. You can't talk about it, etc. But really the key is to deal with conflict as it arises. So when something happens in that moment, you express what's going on for you in that experience, okay? And when you express what's going on for you, you want to use I statements, which is the second conflict resolution method. Now, I statements seem so basic, like you use I statements, but let me tell you, I guarantee if I had a recording for so many of you and your conflicts, and mine too, trust me, I could pinpoint so many statements where you say, well, you did this and that was really messed up. Or remember when you said that, you. And trust me, I totally do this too. I get caught up in this trap. What we want to do is shift into I statements where we say, I, a feeling, so I blank emotion when you blank behavior. So a specific behavior. I feel really disrespected when you don't take out the trash for every single day when I have asked you. I feel disrespected because you know it's important to me that we have a clean house, and I feel really unheard and that you don't take my feelings seriously. So even in that statement, I'm saying you know, so you don't have to avoid that. But the emphasis is on how you feel based on a identifiable behavior. I feel disrespected when you don't take out the trash. So taking out the trash is the identifiable behavior. Or you could say something like, let me think of a recent one for me. I feel really angry when you continue to ignore the fact that I can't do this activity, and I feel angry because I feel like there's pressure on me to perform this activity, even though you all know that I can't do that. And so that one wasn't as good. But you see what I'm saying? You use feeling language. So you first want to think about how you feel based on what's occurring: angry, sad, disrespected, mad, all sorts of things. And then the specific behavior. So I feel really scared when you start slamming the doors when we argue. I'm wondering, what is that like for you to know that I start to feel afraid of you when we get into a fight? Okay. Now, the third conflict resolution method is identifying the specific behaviors, like I said. So they intertwine I statements and specific behavior identification. And the fourth resolution method is taking a collaborative approach. Okay, so I talked about that. And it's really about shifting from that black and white thinking into a larger conceptualization of what's going on in the conflict. Now, there is a subsection of all of conflict management, and the subsection is responding to intercultural conflict, okay? So this is very different. What I have talked about is a broad blanket statement that does not specify what the conflict is about. If the conflict becomes about cultural issues, cultural friction between people, then it's different. There are other elements that need to be involved, and that could be a whole video in itself. But if you find yourself in an intercultural conflict, so you have offended somebody who is of a different identity than yourself, and particularly if you are in a place of privilege and the other person is not, then there are certain things that would be very helpful for you, the privileged person, to reflect on. And really, I'm going to just say a few broad points about that. So if we're responding to intercultural conflict, you really want to increase your awareness of and sensitivity to the various ways culture influences the nature of people, how their cultural background influences the way they express themselves, and how their cultural background influences their management of conflict styles, because it absolutely does. Absolutely. You also want to engage in ongoing focus on increasing your own personal awareness regarding your beliefs, values, and practices. So So making space to examine your beliefs, values, and practices, and thinking about your own personal awareness, because when we are very aware of who we are culturally, ethnically, in our place of privilege, our class status, all sorts of elements, that is the first step in opening up towards all other people. Now, like I said, that's a whole other video on cultural competency and cultural sensitivity. And then, of course, self-awareness about how we typically approach conflict, and where did we learn that from? Where did we, pick up these styles? So I was raised Irish Catholic, so I'm going to have I will have absolutely been influenced by the way I was raised in that paradigm of being Irish and being Catholic. There are styles, whether we know it or not at the time, these sorts of things influence us beyond and forever moving on. Okay, so in closing, I just want to highlight that remember, collaboration is the way to get through it. And reflecting on our own style of conflict management is helpful, and reflecting on any areas of growth that we might have, or noticing, I tend to avoid all the time when it comes to conflict with my mother. Okay, but I'm not that way when it comes to conflict at work. What does that mean? What is there for me to explore? So I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love your comments and questions and suggestions. Feel free to continue the discussion below, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.